everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion, Making Privacy Assessments More Efficient. All right, I'm your moderator for this session. I'm Debra Farber. I'm a privacy advisor and privacy engineering enthusiast at Principled LLC. I'm looking forward to a really lively discussion with our stellar panelists today, where we'll discuss best practices for developing scalable privacy assessment processes that leverage technology, minimize manual effort, and accurately assess risk. We've got, our panelists are Mira Olson. She's a privacy architect at DoorDash. Dylan Weinberger, Senior Data Classification and Privacy Specialist at M&T Bank. And Nick Fuller, the CEO at Fuller Consulting, a privacy technology consulting shop. So to kick it off, I think we're going to start with what type of privacy assessments do you have experience with, and what are the biggest challenges you've encountered with privacy assessment processes? Mira, let's ask you first.
Yeah, happy to, Debra. Thank you. My experience being more in the privacy engineering space is most heavily on technical privacy reviews. So beyond just a PIA, really understanding systems architecture, systems design, full data lifecycle handling. Also have a lot of experience with privacy maturity assessments in the M&A world, as well as data migration and integration assessments. And I'd say, the biggest challenge I've seen is the double-edged sword of creating an official privacy review process itself. The very nature of the privacy review process creates a lot of manual work, and it's almost often more often than not, like the Pandora's box that you're opening as soon as you make a process official. The workload just grows exponentially, and the request for reviews grows exponentially, and so therefore your need for resources to do those manual reviews, at least how they're done traditionally, is often the biggest challenge. And so I frequently see organizations wanting to shy away from even having a formalized review process because of that challenge of just not being able to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Does anyone see that processes like required, like a DPIA under GDPR, or PIAs under, federal government, if you're working with the government, do you find that those processes are by necessity are more onerous than like a privacy risk review that an organization might take on outside of that? Like if maybe you're a US only bank, for instance, or Dylan, I see you nodding. Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, Debra, it really does depend a lot on the overall maturity of the organization. In my previous experience, first at a consumer product company, and then followed by a smaller healthcare startup. In both cases, we had applicable regulations to comply with for assessing our products or applications or processes. And so really the primary challenges I faced were not only, the required resources and bandwidth to make it a sustainable process, not only just at the initiation of an application or a process, but then also on an annual basis thereafter. The other challenge I was going to mention is bridging the knowledge gap for stakeholders as well, whether it's individuals who are more aligned to the business, let's say marketing, that may or may not have that specific privacy context on the basis behind DPIAs or PIAs, or perhaps it's folks who are maybe more sales oriented. One of the biggest challenges is the education piece, to educate them on why we're doing this, but of course setting the expectation afterwards. So I do see that the primary driver behind the onerousness of conducting privacy assessments efficiently and in a scalable fashion are the resources and the education that's required to make it a sustainable process.
That's a really good point. Nick, what about you?
What we're seeing with a lot of our clients is, if you're working in a highly regulated industry, versus going into maybe an industry without all those regulations, but now you have some of these state regs coming online. In the highly regulated, you always have something to point back to. Like if you say HIPAA, someone at that business knows, yeah, duh, I need to care about this. Or you're in banking, you have some of these requirements. A lot of challenges we're seeing with our clients is this is totally new for a lot of them. New Jersey's coming online, and I'm working with a casino, and they didn't care about this at all before because they weren't going abroad. They're not targeting, like they're very localized. But now they need to go through this change management and say, we need a process for these DSAR requests. We have to put a cookie banner now, to support some of these requirements. And so it's taking a big shift internally for these organizations, say, oh, now we actually have some requirements we need to manage against. And it's just a new muscle a lot of these orgs are developing today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I could see, especially in the US, there's been so much sectoral application of, at least federally, of privacy. And now it's at the state level. All of a sudden it's like, boom, now this might be applicable to you. So it is a Herculean, well, not Herculean, but it is a large change management effort. And that's not insignificant. So then the good follow-up question would be, what tools or techniques have you been seeing that make assessments more efficient and more accurate? And then how do you balance the speed of those assessments with maintaining the quality? And quality here, a big part of quality being the accuracy, right?
Right. Yeah. Debra.
So Dylan, why don't you go ahead first?
Of course. In my experience, what I have found successful is, especially in organizations where the privacy assessments might be a newly developed program or process, is to integrate as closely as possible with the organization's existing tools and methodologies. For instance, at my last role, the organization was very Slack and Airtable based. So originally we had contracted a privacy software, to assist with the DPIAs, but we ran into challenges being a smaller organization of providing access to individuals who were trying to access the assessments, and then just having them in a space where they're accessible and visible to the organization as well. So when we realized that, hey, maybe there's a more effective option, we relied upon Slack automation and Airtable, which were great ways for us to be able to complete DPIAs quick and efficiently, but also to share them with the organization, given that many individuals already had access to Airtable in that case.
Yeah, could you expand upon that? What is a little bit of explain some of the automation capabilities that, and I'm thinking here, since they're already tools that the company has purchased licenses for, that the extra additional uses of these features for automation is low, if not zero. So especially for startups, this could be like a good, application of it. So I'd love for you to share some advice there.
100%. Yeah. So at least on the Slack side, Slack is an incredible tool, and between being able to establish workflows, notifications, standard templates that are able to generate when you, but based on the selection of a certain drop-down item. So in our security channel, we were able to pin our DPIA workflow, or maybe we phrased it of, hey, I have a new change to an existing process or application, and based off of that, and their follow-up selections, that would indicate or notify myself or someone on my team to be able to handle that request. In parallel, it also added it created a Jira ticket for us to track as well. And I believe it's been a few months now since my last role, but I believe that there was a way for us to be able to pre-fill the Airtable that we were completing a privacy assessment based on the details that the submitted within a Slack workflow. So we were able to really leverage and get the most out of these native tools and the add-on automation and workflow capabilities that they had. That's a bit of the magic behind it, but I'm happy to opine anywhere, Debra.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really helpful. And I know, Mira, you also have a similar experience, but from a different perspective. I'd love to hear, how you've also leveraged Slack and Jira integrations.
Yeah, as the Slack Jira integration is very, very useful, especially for ad hoc requests where an engineer or a PM knows that they have a potential privacy concern, and so they're flagging it. However, that relies on the user to be able to identify that privacy risk from the beginning. So we're relying on that external input. Where I've seen integration work even better to try to offset maybe the lack of knowledge or privacy expertise on the and take that onus away from the engineers or the PMs, is where that integration or that auto creation or auto Jira ticketing happens to kick off a privacy review when that's actually built into the approval process of an engineering doc requirement or like a PRD or an ERD process. So in that initial requirements documentation, and while that's going through review and approval, there would be a point wherein the product manager or the engineer has to indicate what data is in scope. And ideally, like where that might be stored, but just the simple question of, are you collecting personal data? And if yes, that would trigger the review process to kick off with an automation of a Jira ticket. And then from that, a sub ticket could be created. You're collecting personal data. Well, is this level 1? Is this highly sensitive personal data? Here are some examples of that. Or is this less sensitive personal data? Here are examples of that. If it's more on the sensitive side, that would trigger the manual review process, wherein if it's lower sensitivity, maybe proprietary level personal data that's being collected, not highly sensitive, that would auto triage or auto approve that privacy review, but then create like a checklist of to-dos for the PM or the engineers, like make sure you onboard the privacy service, make sure you're capturing consent, and kind of send that automated list of best practices. But there are ways to both facilitate like expedite the process review and takes away some of that manual lift, while also making sure that you're capturing the need for a privacy review in the first place. And I'll also note, like, we're still relying on some accuracy or at least honesty on behalf of the PMs or engineers who are filling out this documentation. Like, they might want to skip the hurdle of going through an extra review, so they might click no private, no personal data in scope. But I've seen effective having an audit process happen on the back end where reviews that have been auto triaged, auto approved, have gone through, and those are audited for accuracy and to make sure that people are answering honestly, and if not, go back and maybe do a training for engineers or PMs or that sort of thing.
Right. And it might not even be, they might honestly think that, for instance, I don't know, we didn't drop a cookie or a pixel on that page, right? But sometimes, that's where some of these automated scans come in for, obviously that's one example of a scan, but it's not even about honesty. It's just accuracy. You might not know what you don't know, or you might think that something is working in one way, but it really wasn't. I also find that in order to make this process governed appropriately, because we're actually trying to arm the owners of the risk, of the product owners, right, with the to-dos. And we don't want them to have to constantly come to privacy or to legal to constantly ask questions, right? We don't want to be a bottleneck. So instead, we want to empower them with, just give us the basic info that we need to tell you what you need to do. What I found to be really, really helpful is to have some sort of like privacy by design standard doc that kind of tells you that, hey, anybody that's going to, create a new service, a new product, a new data store, however you want to set it up, needs to review this document and see what their overarching obligations are. Like, you might need to onboard a data deletion. You might need to, so the overall governance, I think, can be, then you could just send them this document and and say, here, everything's in here. If there's just come to me with if you need an exception or you have a question. And so that I found that to be effective. Nick, are you seeing stuff like that in your practice?
Absolutely. I think the most successful programs have a standard, right? When you conduct a privacy review, nothing you tell an engineer or your business should be a surprise to them of what are your expectations for how, privacy is managed within the organization. And that could be through things like frameworks like NIST, the privacy framework there. What are the controls that you need to put in place to mitigate these common risks? It's a level of maturity not a lot of organizations are at yet, but I think it's something for us to strive to, because the more you can make this predictable for how the business engages with you, the more they can take ownership. They can say, oh, did we do this on the page yet? Because I know I'm going to get asked about it, because every time I do this assessment, they ask me the same thing and they tell me the same way to mitigate it. So let's just do it now. I think today a lot of this work, I'll say is ad hoc by a lot of programs. We're building up the maturity. We're trying to figure out what are our standards and even trying to get people to fill out the dang assessments, right? So if we can get that far, we can build the muscle, we can start to standardize our responses, and then it becomes a lot more predictable for our end users or our customers within the business of what to expect from us when you engage, what's the advice we're going to give, and anything outside of the norm, great, that's where we can spend our time. That's where the interesting stuff is. But the 80% of, hey, we're pushing out a product release, Mira, we're doing the same thing that we've done every time. Yes, we forgot this one thing, we're going to add it, right? Now we can focus on the cool, crazy stuff that's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, Nick, let's start with you actually on the next question, which is, how do you measure the success of privacy assessment optimization efforts? What metrics have proven most valuable across your clients that you've seen?
I took this as a little bit of a fluffy answer, and maybe Mira and Dylan have like hard quantitative stuff here.
Sure.
I think about this is our customer satisfaction, and our customers are the internal business stakeholders. Do they enjoy reaching out to us? Are we actually seeing an uptick in amount of requests or questions coming to us than we did maybe 6 months ago? Now, have the amount of privacy issues changed? No, but we've built a relationship with them. We know we're not going to yell at them when they come to us. We're not trying to slow down their projects. We're actually trying to accelerate them and get them to market quicker, but in a safe way. So do we have a good relationship with the business? And maybe it's the type of request. We can even send out CSAT scores into the business to see how we're performing, to what's this relationship. And that's something I think you can really rely on. And the stronger relationship you have, the more they're going to share, the more you're going to learn, and the better we can kind of protect the business there. That's a little bit of a fluffy answer. The other folks might have like something quantitative here, but that's how I like to kind of view the role of privacy within the organization.
No, I think it's just at a different operational level of the org. I think that makes sense because business satisfaction is like a huge part of how you're doing in the marketplace, right? So, but I do know, Mira, you have some internal metrics that kind of might make sense. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, no, and I mean, Nick, to your point, relationship building with the business is the crux of all of this, right? We need them to talk to us. So I think that's absolutely key. But Debra, to your point about can we get out, can we, in true privacy by design fashion, get ahead of this by, educating our teams with, privacy best practices trainings, documentation, all of that ahead of time, to then be able to track the number of remediations that come out of your privacy reviews. So how many things does every review need to be fixed at the end? Ideally that's diminishing because we have educated our teams in advance and they've already gone ahead and onboarded to our DSAR service, or, they're already deleting at the, they have a TTL in place or they have access controls in place, that sort of thing. Additionally, I would say if, to my earlier example of where I've seen things work well in terms of efficiencies, when auto triage processes are in place, looking at just how many if you have that X number of reviews that are coming in, how many of them are auto triaged versus how many previously might have been manually reviewed. If the denominator was X number of reviews and previously X equaled X, so there was always manual review, ideally that number of manual reviews is going down over time.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Okay, so Dylan, what are the biggest risks most commonly missed in privacy assessments, in your opinion? And why do you think they're missed?
Sorry, but Debra, I was on mute right there.
That's okay.
And in my experience, I'm on mute. The classic the classic line coined in 2020 still applies today. But back to the question. In my experience, assuming that the privacy assessments are undertaken by the program or privacy program manager or equivalent in a non-legal capacity, one of the biggest risks that I see is not formalizing the role for both legal and data colleagues to weigh in on the actual assessment as well. In that sense, it's the risk kind of comes in two forms. Of one, there are frankly legal considerations or even data feasibility considerations that might not be possible or reflected appropriately. But not only that, the adoption and credibility also of the privacy impact assessment program is a bit at risk there as well. In that if stakeholders are not engaged properly and there might not be the right level of executive support, which is probably a risk in itself, then it's hard for the rest of the organization to take those assessments seriously and know that there is weight behind them and importance to completing them prior to unveiling a new process or product or application, so be it. It's also important to note that oftentimes, especially in smaller or less mature organizations, the assessing team or stakeholders are looped in beyond the point where their assessment can influence the introduction or development of the activity, meaning that it's enough for, or it's one half of the battle for the privacy legal, whichever team is assessing or performing the assessment, but it's also important for them to be included over time, especially for performing annual attestations, for reflecting and revising the assessment based on any changes that may occur to what data is being processed or what applications are being decommissioned or sunset. So it's not enough for a one and done just to say we did it, but for privacy, as we as privacy pros are really yearning for, is to have that seat at the table and to have stakeholders know to come to us for these data related changes, products, and such.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, next. Privacy assessments require significant cross-functional efforts. So what strategies have you seen that successfully improve cross-functional participation? Also, maybe weave into your answer, because this is a question someone else asked about, if you're new in the org, or if the people that you need to get feedback from to complete your assessments have left and that stuff wasn't documented, maybe how would you get that info? But so what have you seen to successfully improve cross-functional participation, including when some of those people don't have the answers? Mira.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I have two answers to this question. And the first part of it, I kind of want to build off of, Dylan, what you were saying and tie it into the risk, which is when we get an assessment that's just a piece of the puzzle and we have a very incomplete view because we don't have the full data flow in front of us. We don't understand the full systems architecture. And so that's where risk can develop. And so if we can get a seat at the table with engineering, with the product managers at the beginning of a quarter, at the beginning of a half, to start to understand what's on the roadmap and call those risks out in advance or call out any privacy issues in advance, we're going to better mitigate that. And we're going to be able to partner with them in advance. Because oftentimes, especially if we're looking at that smaller piece of a puzzle, we might identify, oh, this is an issue here, but it's already, it's a dependency of something else down the line. And so they would need to fixing it becomes burdensome. Whereas had we addressed it earlier, in collaboration, in earlier, design talks with our
Shifting
engineers.
left.
Yeah, shifting left, precisely. Then we can fix this. But in the land of using integrations and to perform our privacy assessments themselves, I've really seen like integrated Jira ticketing system work well when like a PIA can kick off, can tie into and trigger a technical privacy review, or a technical privacy review, in the remediations. The Jira ticket write-up, you can trigger a security review because you need the encryption keys. You want security to review that piece of the puzzle. So really leveraging integrations for the legal, privacy, security overlap to make sure kind of all bases are covered of any review.
Thank you for that. Nick, I know you have a response to this as well. I just also want to bring up, we have 4 minutes left, so I'm just gonna start breezing through some of the other questions. But Nick, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think two things I've seen with my clients, the most successful ones. One, when it comes to cross-functional working together, I had a client who did something I thought was brilliant on any of their PIAs that they were conducting. They had a question of, which organizational goal does this PIA tie to? So their company had like 8 goals for the next 5 years, and now they can quantify their impact to how they're supporting the business's larger strategic initiatives. And they could also say, like, why are you doing this if it doesn't tie back to one of these 8 goals that we have here? Is this something we should spend our time? But now they can also say, look, we're impacting these sales and marketing goals here because we're identifying risk and part of that to accelerating it forward. And now you're talking about a bigger picture versus just like compliance. We're talking about how are we helping the company achieve these larger goals? I thought that was really neat that they were doing. The second piece, from a cross-functional standpoint, is we're all asking the same questions across the business. Security's asking these questions, procurement's asking similar questions, privacy wants to know these answers. So how do we share this data? How do we attempt to answer it once or put the burden on the business once, and then we can all do our own review, whether that's in Jira and having these things kick off, whether it's a different privacy management system where we can share stuff from third-party risk and privacy. We're asking a lot of the same questions. So being able to share this data, ask it once, we can get view into how they're assessing it. We can partner with the other, call this compliance functions to see what information do they want to know that we can also ask, and really optimize these type of assessments where the data is shared and we get a central view into what's going on there. So the more we can share this information we're collecting, I think the more we can all get on the same page. The more you can do that, the better we can support our stakeholders here.
Thank you for that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to skip to a last question. We'll try to answer any of the questions that are in the Q&A within the Q&A. But I do want to ask about the use of AI and Gen AI. Like, what are the biggest opportunities you see to improve privacy assessment processes going forward? And I'm going to lump in with that AI. Mira.
I mean, I think just automating reviews themselves, leveraging AI, leveraging Gen AI to perform reviews and detect privacy risk, and then auto-generate remediation tickets and that sort of thing is a huge area that we can use. Of course, being mindful of what we're feeding into any LLM and not sharing sensitive data with that. So,
yeah, Nick, did you have a last word on that?
I agree, but we need to know what our standards are, because ChatGPT could tell them our different standards than ours. So we have to define what are our standards, what are our controls, what is our view of the world that someone could automate against. The last thing there, and I'll save you 15 seconds here, Dylan, is we also need to be plugged into the loop here. So we want to know what's going on with the business. We can't be taken out of this because we need to evolve with the business as they launch new initiatives.
Awesome. Dylan, any last words?
Yeah. So in my experience, going back to Airtable, maybe they'll sponsor me after this. We utilize a feature in that we provided a body of text that the stakeholder provided us when raising that request for a change or a new product addition, et cetera. And then with Airtable, we put different questions for their model to answer based off of the input that the stakeholder provided. So that was a really neat way of summarizing some really lengthy information or maybe business-specific information for us to be able to better understand it, digest it, and also apply to the privacy and legal and data considerations that we're measuring up against.
Awesome. Well, we're exactly on time. Thank you so much for your expertise today and sharing your thoughts.